This is a battle of philosophical giants across millennia, a contest between the foundation of Western philosophical inquiry and its most provocative contemporary critic. It's less about physical combat and more about intellectual domination and persuasive power. Here is the breakdown of how a debate between Socrates and Slavoj Žižek would likely play out. The contenders and their methods. 1. Socrates, the Grand Inquisitor, method, the Elenchus, Socratic method. He asks relentless, deceptively simple questions designed to expose contradictions in the opponent's core assumptions, leading them to aporia, a state of utter confusion and perplexity. Goal: to expose unexamined belief and pursue genuine knowledge of virtue and truth. Weakness: his method can become repetitive, and he might struggle to adapt to concepts that didn't exist in 5th century BCE Athens, like digital media or psychoanalysis. 2. Slavoj Žižek, the perverse analyst, method, drawing deeply from Hegel, Lacan, psychoanalysis, and Marx. He uses jarring, often vulgar, and pop culture examples, movies, toilet humor, political scandals, to illustrate complex, abstract ideological structures. Goal: to expose the hidden ideological fantasy that structures reality and social enjoyment. Weakness: his style is inherently dense, rambling, and relies heavily on specific theoretical terminology that requires prior knowledge. The debate dynamics. Round 1. The opening salvo. Žižek attacks the foundation. Žižek would likely begin by performing a psychoanalytic critique of Socrates' entire project. He wouldn't argue against Socrates' definitions. He would argue that Socrates' pursuit of absolute truth and virtue is itself a symptom of ideological enjoyment, jouissance. Žižek: but Socrates, you claim to seek the good. But what is this good if not the ultimate ideological fantasy, the big other that structures your entire desire? You are trapped in the symptom of your own search. Round 2. Socratic counterattack, the Elenchus deployed. Socrates would seize on Žižek's terms. He wouldn't understand big other or ideology in the modern sense, but he would force Žižek to define them clearly until the definitions collapse. Socrates, tell me, this ideological fantasy you speak of, is this fantasy good or bad for the soul? If it leads one away from virtue, is it not inherently flawed? And if this fantasy defines what is real, how do we know that your critique of the fantasy is not simply another, more convincing fantasy? Round 3. The clash of style, the collapse. This is where the fight gets messy. Žižek's defense. Žižek would likely respond to the confusion by doubling down, perhaps telling a bizarre, lengthy anecdote about a Stalinist joke or a recent Hollywood blockbuster, using it to illustrate how the subject enjoys their own lack of knowledge. He would intentionally become confusing to create aporia, his goal, in a way Socrates didn't intend. At Socrates' reaction, Socrates would be genuinely baffled. He is used to dissecting flawed logic, but Žižek is arguing from a framework where logic itself is a product of structural distortion. Socrates might become exasperated, potentially defaulting to his standard closing move, I know that I know nothing, but this time, it sounds less like wisdom and more like surrender to modern complexity. The conclusion. Winner, Žižek, by technical knockout, or by frustrating Socrates into silence. While Socrates is the master of classical dialectic, his tools were designed to expose simple, unexamined moral assumptions. Žižek operates on a meta level, suggesting that the very tool Socrates is using, the pursuit of objective truth, is itself a symptom of a deeper, ideological malaise. Socrates would run out of clear questions to ask, unable to ground Žižek's dense, psychoanalytic framework in tangible ethical definitions. Žižek would ultimately win the modern stage by proving that even the foundational critique of philosophy, Socrates, can be reinterpreted as a desirable ideological symptom.
Short answer. Socrates wins the debate. Žižek wins the spectacle. Why Socrates wins, on points. Socrates doesn't argue so much as disarm. He'd calmly ask Žižek what he means by ideology, then what he means by meaning, then whether Žižek is sure he means that meaning, and suddenly Zizek is 40 minutes in, gesticulating wildly, realizing he's just contradicted himself. Socrates' superpower is the elenchus, ruthless clarity via innocent questions. No props, no references, just logical judo. Also, Socrates is terrifyingly patient. He'd happily lose the crowd to win the truth. Why Zizek wins, in the room. Zizek would absolutely dominate the vibe. He'd cough, sniff, interrupt himself, drag in Hegel, Hitchcock, toilets, and some obscene joke, and the audience would be howling. He thrives in chaos. Socrates asks one question at a time. Zizek fires 20 ideas before you can finish blinking. Zizek also plays on meta levels. He might say something like, "But you see, Socrates pretending not to know is itself ideology." Crowd goes wild. Twitter explodes. Clips go viral. The real outcome: Socrates wins the argument. Zizek wins the audience. Everyone else leaves confused, slightly smarter, and questioning reality. If this were a courtroom, Socrates; a university lecture hall, Zizek; a podcast, Zizek by knockout; a trial for corrupting the youth, well, history's not on Socrates' side.
What a lit debate topic. Socrates would likely go full-on Socratic method on Zizek, questioning his assumptions and jargon-filled rants. What do you mean by ideology, my dear Slavich? Can you define it without referencing Lacan? Meanwhile, Zizek would probably try to psychoanalyze Socrates, saying his method is a manifestation of the parallax view, and that his pursuit of knowledge is a symptom of the void in his being. Socrates would respond with some witty remark about Zizek's love for obscure references and lack of clear definitions. In the end, it's a draw. Both would be too busy philosophizing to actually fight.
This kind of who would win question is ultimately unanswerable in any strict sense, but it is fun and revealing to think through what winning would even mean for each of them. For Socrates, winning is getting the other person to recognize their own confusion and to care more about truth than about seeming clever or victorious. For Zizek, winning is exposing the hidden ideological assumptions behind the other's position and showing how our very way of asking questions is already contaminated by ideology. So Socrates aims at clarifying concepts and showing that we are not as wise as we think, whereas Zizek aims at unmasking ideology and showing that we are less free than we think. Socrates' likely advantages. Socrates' method, elenchus, forces short, clear answers and then drives them into contradictions. That structure tends to favor him in a one-on-one dialogue because it keeps control of the conversation. He is relentless about definitions. What do you mean by justice, courage, ideology, freedom? That pressure could make Zizek's often sprawling, associative style look evasive rather than incisive in a purely dialectical setting. Socrates' rhetorical persona is "I know that I do not know," which makes him hard to corner. Attacks bounce off someone who disowns expertise and keeps asking questions. Zizek's likely advantages. Zizek's strength is metacritique. He could argue that Socratic questioning itself is embedded in a specific historical ideological form of rationality, Greek polis, male citizens, etc., so the neutral search for definitions is already ideological. He can deploy psychoanalytic ideas, desire, fantasy, the unconscious, to say that Socrates' desire for clarity hides a deeper enjoyment in disturbing others and in staging his own marginality. Zizek is very good at turning the tables by showing how any given position secretly depends on what it claims to oppose. He might try to show that Socratic purity of reason relies on the very social myths it undermines. If it is a philosophical debate. If winning means who better exemplifies the classical ideal of rational dialogue and clarity, Socrates probably wins because the format is his home turf and his method is built to dominate step-by-step discussion. If winning means who better captures the complexity and ideological entanglement of late modern life, Zizek looks closer to contemporary experience and so could be judged to win in relevance rather than in clarity. if it is a literal fight. If the question is tongue-in-cheek about a physical fight, Socrates was a trained Athenian citizen soldier, a hoplite, who fought in real battles, while Zizek is a contemporary, aging academic with no comparable martial background. In that purely physical, ahistorical fantasy scenario, Socrates almost certainly wins. In short, in a tightly controlled, definition-driven dialogue, Socrates has the edge. In a sprawling, ideologically self-aware cultural critique, Zizek has the edge. The more the debate looks like a Platonic dialogue, the more it favors Socrates. The more it looks like a lecture on ideology, the more it favors Zizek.
This is a fun hypothetical matchup. Assuming we're talking about a philosophical debate, not a fistfight. Socrates was a wrestler in his youth, but Zizek's more of a thinker than a brawler. Let's break it down based on their styles, ideas, and historical contexts. I'll evaluate them head-to-head like a boxing match, drawing from verifiable philosophical sources, e.g., Plato's dialogues for Socrates, Zizek's books like The Sublime Object of Ideology. Round 1. Style and approach. Socrates, c. 470 to 399 BCE, master of the Socratic method. Relentless questioning to expose contradictions and uncover truth. He's all about irony, humility, I know that I know nothing, and dismantling pretensions. No writings of his own. We know him through Plato and Xenophon. Slavoj Zizek, born in 1949. A whirlwind of Lacanian psychoanalysis, Hegelian dialectics, Marxism, and pop culture references, e.g., analyzing Hitchcock films to critique ideology. He's verbose, provocative, and loves paradoxes, often tying philosophy to movies, politics, and everyday life. Edge. Socrates. His method could trap Zizek in endless, but what do you mean by that? Loops, frustrating Zizek's tendency to ramble. Round 2. Key strength. Socrates focuses on ethics, virtue, and the soul. He'd grill Zizek on the examined life and challenge modern ideologies as sophistry. Zizek draws from Freud, Lacan, and Hegel to dissect capitalism, ideology, and the unconscious. He'd counter Socrates with critiques of ancient idealism, perhaps calling it a fantasy of pure reason, masking power structures. Edge. Zizek. His access to 2,000 plus years of philosophical evolution, including critiques of Socrates via Nietzsche or Marx, gives him a broader toolkit. Plus, he'd throw in a joke about Socrates drinking hemlock as a symbolic suicide in the Lacanian reel. Round 3. Weaknesses and wildcard. Socrates. Limited to oral dialogue. No Twitter or books to reference. Might dismiss Zizek's pop culture analogies as irrelevant. Zizek, known for tics, sniffing, rambling, and sometimes incoherent tangents. Socrates could exploit this by demanding clarity. Wild card. If it's a modern debate with an audience, Zizek's charisma and memeability, he's a cultural icon, might sway votes. Socrates. He'd probably annoy everyone into self-reflection. Verdict, it's a draw. But if I have to pick, in a pure intellectual showdown, Zizek might edge at a win due to his synthesis of history's greatest thinkers and ability to adapt Socrates' ideas into contemporary critiques, e.g., Zizek has referenced Socrates in his work on ideology. However, Socrates' timeless method could humble Zizek by revealing inconsistencies in his own views. Ultimately, it's subjective. Philosophy isn't about winning, but provoking thought. Who do you think would take it, and in what arena? Debate, rap battle, arm wrestling, grinning face with smiling eyes.